where we all began. What year was Wana Edibles founded?
So Wana Edibles was founded in 2010, and accuracy compels me to say I'm actually the co-founder. There's two founders for Wana Brands. But we are based in Boulder, Colorado, and we got our start. Obviously, the market was just medical at that point in time. And so we're coming up with our 10th anniversary in 2020.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
How many states are we in right now?
We are in 7.
Okay, awesome. And when did that expansion start? When was the first?
So our first state was Oregon. And I think that is, I'm looking at my team who's conveniently located in front of me so they can help me. How many fingers, guys? I think we started in Oregon 3 years ago, I think. And so currently we're in Oregon, we're in Arizona, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio. This little state, California, you've probably heard of it. We just launched there recently. Okay. So, yeah, those are our states.
I have to ask, while it's up, how is California going from your perspective?
California is a wild ride. But I think it's going very well. We literally just launched about a month ago. And we're learning the ins and outs of that marketplace, which is pretty significantly different than other marketplaces that we have dealt with. So I could elaborate on that if anybody's curious later, but it's been an interesting ride so far. But we think we're going to do very well in California. But as I keep saying to our team, it is a marathon, not a sprint. And we are going to do it the right way. We're not going to compete by trying to be the lowest cost provider in the marketplace, which in my opinion is a recipe for disaster. So we're going to find the dispensaries that have the right demographics for us and who appreciate a premium product, and we're going to take it slow and profitable. So that's our California strategy.
Awesome, love it. Would you consider yourself a serial entrepreneur? You had a company before this one, yeah?
I did. Actually, I have mostly a very boring corporate background, to be honest with you. But I did have a sales and marketing consultancy before I did Wana Brands. So I guess in that sense, I am a serial entrepreneur.
I saw an interview where you were talking about the difference between the service you're providing when you're a consultant versus. I always think that's interesting in the cannabis industry because I have friends who work in factories in cannabis, right? And that in our generation is not a very common thing. What do you think is the difference when you're an entrepreneur selling your time, selling your billable hours versus selling, a product? Do you prefer one or the other?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that is actually one of the drivers for me of why I got into cannabis, which I'll talk about in a second. But the biggest difference is that when you're in a service-based business such as consulting, it's very hard to scale that. Really, mostly people want you and your background. And if you are very lucky and you can build sort of a replicable service, you can build a company such as Bankst is doing, I would say. But by and large, I think product companies are easier to scale and easier to establish an independent value apart from their founder and owner.
Makes sense. Yeah. Why did you get into cannabis? What prompted that journey there?
So I'm laughing because it's sort of an ongoing joke that I need a better backstory is always my line when people ask me how I get into cannabis, because so often in the cannabis industry, people have really wonderful, moving stories, either, social equity issues or a family member that was member who was ill or somebody who was helped by it. And I spoke at MJ Biz a couple of years ago, and I spoke with Pete Cadence from GTI. And of course, that was the first question that the moderator asked us. And Pete gets up and just tells the story. I'm weeping. It was just such a beautiful story that I'm like, I got nothing. So basically what my story really was is that one of my kids had a friend whose dad was a commercial real estate developer. This is 2010 in Boulder. Anybody around Colorado in 2010? Yeah, it was a really awful time to be a commercial real estate developer. So I happened to ask him, what are you doing these days? And he said, oh, well, you wouldn't approve. And I made a little bit of a wisecrack, I have to admit. I said, are you a child pornographer? And he said, no. what is it that I wouldn't approve of? And he said, well, I'm doing this infused soda pop company. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Infused with what? Really? And this was, certainly I was no stranger to the world of cannabis, but I really wasn't kind of tracking what was going on with legalization. But long story short, my co-founder and I ended up going into business with him and building out a kitchen. It was a very short-lived partnership, but it kind of got us going in the industry. But the bottom line of this story is, as a matter of fact, I just had an amazing conversation, if Daniel is here somewhere, if you don't mind me sharing. But I actually didn't know that much about the medical uses of cannabis when I got into the business. It's not that I didn't believe it, I just didn't really know much about it. So got into the business, and as we started getting our products out into the marketplace, I started getting just incredible feedback from people on how much our products helped them get through chemo, helped them manage their MS symptoms, helped them get off of opiates. And it was like a series of light bulbs just going off for me, like, oh my God, this is real. Has true medicinal value. And from there, I really became fascinated by the plant, by the industry, 150% committed to the whole thing. But truly, my initial motivation for it was I was interested in product-based business, and it sounded kind of fun, and it sounded kind of interesting. And, sometimes that's where life takes you.
Was there a time when you kind of knew it was starting to work? Was there like a clear moment of this is like a clarification there, or was it just a lot of little small victories and suddenly you look back?
It was more that. I don't think there was sort of a particular moment in time. It's interesting, and there was a bunch of people who raised their hands that they've been in the industry for 10 years, but if those of you who are in the industry, or at least were following the industry, remember, it was pretty Wild West back then. There were really no regulations in place. There was no third-party lab testing. There was no seed-to-sale tracking. There was no child-resistant packaging. There was no marketing of edibles. There was really pretty much nothing. So the first couple of years of being in business were really all about lots and lots and lots of product development. And I use that word advisedly, because most of what we were doing and what other companies were doing was just trying everything under the sun and seeing what worked. I used to joke that our market research consisted of developing a product, putting it out in the market, and seeing if it sold or not, right? Which is actually the best market research that there is. But now, of course, we do more elaborate things than that. But we really were just trying to see what can we put out there that will resonate with consumers. And then secondarily, we were saying, how do we keep up with this avalanche of changing regulation? Some of it truly business model changing. You would have to really, really overhaul your manufacturing processes or overhaul how you were doing things. And so what we saw is that a lot of the very early brands in the space, with people who didn't have business backgrounds or didn't have the tenacity to kind of go through all these regulatory cycles, dropped out of the industry pretty quickly.
You said you did lots of different product testing. Any particularly zany or out there ones, number one, and otherwise, how did it start to crystallize into knowing what you were particularly good at, and how did that come about?
That's actually a great question. So we did have one notable product, which was our infused beef jerky, which trust me when I tell you do not want to see beef jerky being made. It's put me off of, it's a miracle I ate meat at all at this point. But we did have a bunch of products out there. They mostly fell into, we had confectionery products right from the start. We had baked goods. We had things like, infused drink mixes and hot chocolates and stuff like that. I think what really became clear over time was that what we really liked best were products that had long shelf lives and were easy to transport, right? So, we would often find when we were doing baked goods, we never did get the secret of how to have them have a very long shelf life. And so, we'd get stuff out to the Western Slope and hear 3 days later, hey, your brownies are going moldy, right? So there was a lot of experimentation. What we did see very early on is that there was one company back in the day who was just selling a ton of gummies. Now, their particular business model at that time was they were literally just buying pre-made gummies and spraying them with hash oil. But they were selling a lot of them. And so we said, you know what, we could do this, and we could do this better. So we did end up developing a artisan, handmade, homemade, very delicious gummy. We worked on the recipe for it for literally a couple of years to both get it to the taste and texture that we wanted and to be able to scale it, to have it not start to get sticky or melty when the weather got hot. There was quite a lot of product development for it. But when we, and of course at the time we didn't have BDS analytics or headset or anything to tell us what was going to be popular. So we really didn't know. But what we did find quickly is that the gummy form is sort of a perfect delivery mechanism for cannabis. It's small, it's discreet. Because we take them as vitamins, many of us, we're used to eating one of them without feeling deprived. You know, I often say that I think one of the reasons that there are not a lot of savory edibles on the market is because who wants to eat one cracker, right? You know, you want to eat the whole bag of crackers or chips or whatever it is. And as a manufacturer, that means that you have to make a lot of them. So it's kind of hard to make the economics of that both work for the brand and work for the consumer. So the gummy really started to be sort of, I would say, our signature edible, and it sort of took off from there. We had no way of knowing at that point in time that gummies were going to actually be the #1 edible across the whole country. So to business being a combination of hard work and luck, that was our luck, which is that we early on got into gummies and continue to ride that train to this very day.
Awesome. So, of course, the future of edibles, rather.
You can take gummies.
Yeah, you can take gummies. That's still my favorite personally as well. But the future of edibles is something you obviously think quite a bit about, I would imagine. So just starting from kind of a top level, do you want to sketch out what you think where we're kind of going here, and maybe we can dive into some of the specifics?
Sure. Before I go forward, let me go back a little bit, if that's okay. When we first started WANA, the amount of variety and variation in the edibles market really was limited, I would say, to the product form itself and flavors. So, you would have, a million different, and in fact, there was many more product forms back then. There was infused barbecue sauce and fantastic beef jerky and all kinds of different stuff. But it was all just plain THC, right? There was no class-specific edibles. There were no CBD ratios. There was no effect-based marketing. It really was just THC products, and they came in a lot of different forms, right? So already, if you look at where we are today, you can already see that there's been a lot of evolution in where edibles have been to where they are now. Now you can have a much more curated experience with edibles. You can, decide to a certain degree what kind of effect you want to have. You certainly can have a wide variety of dosage, from very microdose products to very strong products on the medical side. You can have all different kinds of CBD and THC ratios. You can have different durations, how long things last, and how quickly they come on. So already we have a much more sophisticated environment for edibles. And I think that what's going to happen in the future is that we're going to see an acceleration of that. I think we're going to start seeing more things being introduced in meaningful ways into the edibles. I think we're going to see terpene profiles become more and more important as it becomes more cost effective to be able to use some of the minor cannabinoids or the rare occurring cannabinoids. I think we're going to start to see products that have that. We've already started to see some products that have functional ingredients built into them. And I think that what we're going to also start seeing is people understanding how to combine and stack things in more sophisticated ways than they are today. In some ways right now, what I would say is that the technology is actually running ahead of what our actual knowledge is about how various things impact us. So we have the capacity to extract cannabinoids and terpenes, and we have the capacity to distill them and to refine them and to recombine them. But we just haven't had the time and experience yet to do enough testing to know what the impacts of all of those different combinations are. So I think that's the future, I think, is going to become more refined and more sophisticated, and it's going to allow people to have more specificity in the experience that they're looking for with cannabis.
So when you're talking like functional ingredients, are we talking like caffeine, things combining things we already take in other forms, but we don't currently combine with cannabis?
Exactly. You'll see some supplements in some products. Sometimes what you see is that people are putting supplements in, but they're actually not putting them in at a level that would have any effect. So it's more of a marketing move than an actual effect move. But I think that that's going to change over time as well as people become more sophisticated about how to construct products.
Are there any particular, I said caffeine, but any particular directions you see that going? I mean, if, of all the natural ingredients people take supplements of and all the different, is there some avenues specifically, like caffeine being energy, maybe some being sleep, are there other ones as well? Or do you think it'll just be all over the place?
No, I think that it is going to be functional ingredients that are associated with particular experiences. So, for example, and part of what is motivating this, of course, in addition to wanting to have more effective products, is that, for example, within the CBD world, as many of you may know, there's a lot of restrictions that are put on making any claims about anything about products, right? So the exception to that is if there's something in the product that has research that has already verified the claim, right? So I think you're going to see people gravitating towards functional ingredients that have some research behind them that says, yes, this actually is good for sleep, or this actually is good for relaxation, this is good for energy or mental clarity or whatever it is. So I think that, some of the ones that we're already familiar with are going to find their way into cannabis products.
Gotcha. And it sounds like you have some confidence that there are cannabinoids we don't yet really take advantage of. There's terpene combinations. What gives you that kind of confidence? Is this research that you've seen, or you just feel like the market's ready for that? Or what makes you think that that will be a goal that the industry will find success in with all these different...
That's a great question. Actually, we have sitting here WANA's Director of Innovation, Mike, who's here. And Mike performs a lot of functions for WANA, but one of them is keeping on top of all the latest breaking research and scientific and technical research that's going on in these various areas. And there's just a lot of exciting information that's out there in terms of the impact that things like terpenes and flavonoids and the minor cannabinoids actually have. Now, your second part of the question, I think, is a very interesting one, which is, do I think the market is ready for them? No. Actually, I think that we're going to have to baby step our way into this, because I think that it's already confusing enough if you go into a dispensary and there's 70 or 80 different SKUs of edibles that are in there, and now you start, adding, less known ingredients, etc. So I do think this is going to be sort of a multi-year process, and I think what you'll see is there'll be breakthroughs in particular areas. Somebody will come up with a set of terpenes that are particularly effective for something, and they'll market those, or somebody will figure out, just exactly the right ratio of CBG or CBN to get the effect that you're looking for. But one of the challenges of the industry, of course, is that we have to sell our products through dispensaries, at least in Colorado we do. And so we really need to depend on the bud tenders to be the transmitters of information. And that can be challenging because the bud tenders generally have a lot of turnover. depending on how long they've been in the industry and who they happen to be with, they may or may not have a lot of training available to them. So in a situation where we have to depend on the bud tenders to transmit our story and transmit our information, it means that we have to find a way to distill that story down to something that's very easily explained to a consumer.
So speaking of that, like distilling that down and spreading the word, I'm curious, Juana seems like a huge brand, especially in Colorado, but I know it's a brand that reaches across the country. How much do you think that those brands are powerful when you're coming online to a new market? Are you starting from scratch, educating the local consumers about the brand, or do you come into these markets and find they already know about the brand, obviously only through visiting legal states and consuming within those borders?
Of course.
But how do you find that kind of spreads when you get onto new
It's
brands?
a little bit of a mixed bag. It was funny, I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago. The Yale School of Management put on the first business school sponsored cannabis symposium, and they asked me to speak at it. And for those of you who don't know, in case anybody doesn't know, Yale is in New Haven, Connecticut, not a state that has much in the way of a medical marijuana industry. And so I said, I'm just curious, show of hands, how many people here have ever heard of Juana? And I'll say that at least half the room raised their hands. Now, this was a self-selecting group, to be fair, because obviously they were at a cannabis event, right? But sometimes it's actually surprising to me how known the brand is in other states. And a part of that, I think, is the tourism industry that we have here. And people come to Colorado and they try stuff and they know about it. And then we also have situations like we have in California. We have our Chief Revenue Officer, Eric, here, who I'm sure will back me up on this. But, when we go into California, sometimes, our sales reps will go into dispensaries and say, we're the best-selling edible in the United States. And they go, you're nothing here, basically. So, it's humbling, but being humbled is good, right? So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I'd say that I'm surprised by how far-reaching the brand is, and then I'm also disheartened to see how much work we still have to go.
You mentioned earlier that market research used to be kind of self-spun, so to speak. Is that something you've gotten much more sophisticated? I mean, obviously, all of cannabis is mostly startups at this point. So, is it getting to the level that you're hiring the kind of firms that you would see in other industries? Or I'm curious, how sophisticated is market research now?
That's a good question. What I can share is, how the process that we typically go through when we think about a product. And actually, I'm going to use an actual product to illustrate that. So maybe about a year ago, we launched our line of disposable vapes. Has anybody ever seen one as disposable vapes? Yeah, okay, great. So, vapes is probably the most crowded category in the cannabis industry, right? But it's also the fastest growing, or it was until recently, but it will be good. So, we had been in vapes a long, long time ago, had gotten out, and then I was really interested in figuring out how to re-enter the market. So, one of the first things that we did, of course, is we went and looked to the analytics provider who we use, and we scoured the industry in terms of understanding the trends and what was happening with vapes and what brands were trending and all of that. And then what we did is we actually went to some of our closest dispensary partner relationships. And we did a series of interviews and focus groups with buyers and owners and said, hey, let's be really transparent here. We're thinking about getting into this. What do you think? And at least half of them said, the world does not need another vape brand. Don't do this, right? But what ended up as we dug in further and further and further is that we kept saying to people, well, where do you have pain points on this? And what emerged from that was that disposable vapes at that point in time were really mostly cheap hardware and bad tasting oil. That people were equating disposable with beginner, and couldn't imagine, a situation where a more sophisticated user might just prefer a disposable battery. So what we ended up realizing is that we had an entry point into the disposable market. If we took the quality of the hardware up and took the quality of the oil up and did proprietary terpene blends, all of which we did. And so that was the strategy that we entered with. And within 6 months, we were the #1 disposable vape brand in the state. And then we came out with our 510 cards matching what we did there. So it's a combination of looking at the data and what the market is telling us, and then going out to our customers and going out to the marketplace and understanding what their needs are. And then finally, a lot of R&D time on actually formulating the product itself.
Did any of the recent changes in the Colorado legislature this year have any effect on you guys? I mean, delivery coming down the road, is that something that you think about a lot? Or is the market in Colorado pretty stable and you're just kind of full steam ahead and focusing elsewhere at this point?
Compared to, many other markets we're in, it is pretty stable at this point. We haven't had any really sort of blockbuster things come through. Delivery, because it's all going to be through dispensaries, doesn't really change our world very much. If they had allowed brands to do delivery, it would have radically changed our world, but that's not how it went.
How about, and this isn't as recent, but like the transporter license, is that something you guys take advantage of? I'm curious, as your brand gets bigger and bigger, are there parts of your operations that make sense to kind of offload, like transporting across to the Western Slope or things like that?
Yes, we use sort of a hybrid delivery model where we have in-house couriers, and then we also use third-party transporters for long-distance runs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What do you see that's actually, I should say, we'll probably open up for like 3 or 4 audience questions as well. I'd like to try to give a little heads up as we're kind of wrapping up my questions here. When you, what do you see as like the long-term trajectory of Wana? Is the idea to dominate in the biggest states? Is the idea to be everywhere? Is there an exit strategy of any of these startups? What do you see going forward in the near to long future for Wana?
The future is bright for Wana.
Right.
I think, in terms of state strategy, when I look at states, I'm looking at a variety of different things. And right now I'm talking medical. I'm looking at the population of the state itself, what the allowable conditions are, what the prescribing, who's allowed to say, yes, you can get a medical card, and then the likelihood that state is going to go adult use at some time in the future. So our strategy on the state side is to go to those markets. And I particularly like brand new markets, particularly after learning a little bit more about what it's like to get into California. I love brand new markets where we could be a first mover and, really take a lot of market share. So I don't see us necessarily wanting to be everywhere. I think we're going to be selective about where we go. I think that we are pinning a lot of our future on innovation and product development. And I believe, our product lineup and portfolio is going to be a lot more sophisticated in a year than it is now.
One thing I love about Wana, particularly Colorado cannabis, a little bit more largely, we're a place where a lot of small entrepreneurs started. You guys were so scrappy. You went through all the hoops, and Wana is a great example where you guys came out on top, and you're not the only ones in Colorado cannabis. Do you think that there's still room for these scrappy entrepreneurs, or what can the industry do to keep that door open? Is that important for us as an industry or a culture?
I do think it's important, and I think that new people bring a freshness and a new point of view to the industry that's critical and very valuable. I guess if I had any advice to impart to new entrepreneurs, what I would say is focus on making a great differentiated product first. Don't worry so much about your visual branding and your marketing and your advertising and your celebrity endorsements and all of the rest of that. Start with a great product, because still things are sold through dispensaries largely at bud tender recommendations. And bud tenders are a very savvy and experienced group of people. They don't really care if you put the celebrity name in. They'll try it, but if it's not good, they're not going to recommend it. So start there and look for a way to compete that's more interesting than just dropping your price, because that's not a very sustainable strategy. And I would say be known for something. Don't try to take on too much all at once. Start with something that's kind of your core that people say, oh, Wana gummies or Incredibles chocolates or whatever it might be.
Awesome. Well, I'll open it up if anyone has any questions. Yes, in the back. I'll repeat the question on the microphone.
I'm Holly. My question is about the future and, say, the impact of legalization. There's a lot of good things that might happen around that, but it also, I'm curious your take on the impact to dispensaries and consumer products like yours. If, for instance, tobacco growers shift their crops to cannabis, or your big vapor rub has CBD in it and it's sold at Costco and Sam's, that drives the margins. What does that mean for entrepreneurs and consumer products?
So what happens to some of the smaller companies, smaller brands, when the big 800-pound gorillas step into the room?
There's a lot of different possible scenarios with that. Different parts of the industry will be impacted in different ways. So if, Philip Morris decides to, because they don't grow either, by the way, they just contract out all of their growing. But if they decide to, have all of their tobacco farmers become cannabis farmers, it doesn't really impact me. It might make things cheaper, actually. If a CPG company decides that they want to get into edibles, that's going to have more of a direct impact. However, if you look at what's happening in CPG right now, if you look at the large CPG companies, most of the way they innovate now is by acquisition. They do relatively little internal product development of new things. So certainly that becomes a possible exit for a smaller company that has developed a brand but doesn't have the distribution power of, a General Foods or something along those lines. So I think in terms of dispensaries, that one's an interesting one. I mean, I think that e-commerce will change things hugely. Amazon overnight could become the largest purveyor of cannabis. Home delivery is going to change things hugely. So I think the dispensary model is going to have to figure out how they provide more value to consumers when they're not the only game in town.
Great. Any other questions? Yes.
Eric with ADS Analytics. You had mentioned that people, like you guys had done beef jerky as a savory edible. Do you see, any savory treats coming down the line, or what's going to be the next one? Because having been a bud tender before, people did come in and say, like, I don't want all the sugar. I just want something savory.
Yeah.
What's the future of that?
It's interesting. I frequently joke that people are always coming up to me and saying, I have the best idea for an edible. And I always say, well, don't tell me, for heaven's sakes. But they do anyway. I think I have an honest face or something. But what typically, a lot of times what I hear, in fact, are savory edibles. And oftentimes they're very niche-y. I'm going to do a puffed organic quinoa bar with, bacon bits. I don't know what. But I think the issue with savory things is kind of what I said before, which is that it's finding that balance, if you will, between what is satisfying at a visceral level for a consumer who's eating the product. It's a product that you, as Liz says, you just can't eat one, right? You want to be able to eat a bag of it. But for me as a brand to produce a 10 milligram bag of potato chips, because it would be very hard to do a multi-serving thing, it's going to be expensive And people aren't necessarily going to be willing to pay, twice as much for a bag of potato chips as they would for a 10 milligram edible. So I think there's some economics built into savory products that are a little bit more challenging. Now, if people, when we think of savory products, I think we tend to think salty and, sort of snacky. If there was like a bar or something that was very simple to produce that was savory, that I do think that we are increasingly conscious of sugar and not taking in excess sugar. So I think there is consumer demand. It's matching the demand with what brands can profitably produce.
All right. Questions? Yes, standing right behind the back row.
Yeah, so building on that question, I'm curious your thoughts. Obviously, in the food landscape, it's adapting very quickly to consumer demand, things like gluten-free, things like nut-free, all of these things that are in consumer mindset in the marketplace. Do you see that coming to the edible marketplace?
Again, this is related to my story about how people always tell me that they've got a great idea for an edible. The issue is right now is that as long as we have to go state by state, anything that's super niche-y like that is going to struggle, in my opinion, because dispensaries are very limited in terms of their shelf space, and they don't have room on their shelves to put, this is an oat milk bar versus do you know what I mean? They're just, in the real world, in the big world, there's room for all of that stuff because we can go into a supermarket that's, 100,000 square feet. When you're going into a dispensary that's 2,000 square feet, for them to have tons of very niche products on the shelf is going to be fairly hard for them to do, which is why when you look at what the popular edibles are, they're pretty mainstream. They're gummies, they're chocolate, they're, baked goods, they're things like that. So it's coming in the long run. I don't see it being an easy road for people right now.
All right, yeah, I'm standing in the back.
To actually feed off of that, do you see big box dispensaries on the horizon at all?
Not until 280E gets fixed, probably. But you are seeing some Planet 13 in Vegas is probably pretty close to a big box dispensary. Has anybody been to Planet 13? Yeah. So I think that we are going to see that. I think there's certain markets where that's going to work better than others.
Yes, we'll probably do the last question right in the center there, standing.
Oh, great. So I guess
That's you.
On the end of the other ones, as on-site consumption becomes more common in places like California, how do you think edibles will fit in the future of edibles in those arenas?
Yes, well, that's interesting because one of the edibles that we haven't talked about at all tonight is beverages, which has gotten an enormous amount of attention, as everybody probably knows, in the last year or so. And I'm actually, I don't want to say skeptical. I'm not sure on the whole beverage front. It's always been a tiny category. I think it's 1.5. Where's our BDS and headset friends? I think it's 1.5% of the total edibles market or something along those lines. So it's never been an especially robust category before. Where I think it does fit the best is in a social consumption environment. I also think that the quick onset edibles have a strong place in a social consumption situation because, it's when you're out and you're consuming something, you don't want to say, that was great, I can't wait to wait for an hour and see what happens, right? So you want something that kicks in pretty fast, right? So I think it's going to be a matter of finding the right product form to fit the consumption venue.
Awesome. Well, I love to end on a note about the future of edibles there. So thanks everybody for coming out. Let's give a round of applause for Nancy.